Greetings everybody around the world. It's time once again for Ancient Aliens Radio. This is the dedicated radio show for the cast of Ancient Aliens. Here we interview authors and researchers as an ongoing investigation into the ancient alien theory. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube channel Ancient Aliens Radio. I'm delighted to have a new guest today, Mr. Jim Marrs. He is an award-winning journalist and author. Graduating from the University of North Texas with a degree in journalism, Marrs worked for and owned several Texas newspapers before becoming an independent journalist and author. Marrs is the author of New York Times bestsellers, Crossfire, The Plot That Killed Kennedy, the basis for the Oliver Stone film JFK, and Rule by Secrecy. His in-depth overview of the UFO phenomena, Alien Agenda, is the best-selling non-fiction book on UFOs in the world, having been translated into several foreign languages. Jim's website is jimmarrs.com. Jim's no stranger to TV either. He's on the host. He's been hosted on Ancient Aliens, TV show as well, History Channel, and quite frequent speaker at conferences, I believe. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Jim.
Howdy, James. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, it's a great thing to have you on the show, Jim. You know, I was, to be honest, I'm trying to remember when I first came across your work. I think it was the documentary on giants. At that time, I wasn't aware of anything, and I think it was then after that I looked in and I seen you again talking about the Aurora, Texas incident. And then I got into who you were, Jim, and I realized how important your work is, because I guess as a journalist, you have the freedom to research whatever you want, Jim. A lot of people either want to, make themselves a UFO guy, or they want to make themselves a megalith guy, or they want to make themselves a whatever, an astronomy guy or a history guy. And you have that freedom, Jim, and you've done such a wealth of information. Tell us about the journalism, Jim, what that means to you, how important it is, and did you ever see this as the road you wanted to walk?
Well, I suppose so, because I've always been a curious person, and I've always been a well-read person. Before I was even in middle school, in elementary school, and before high school, I was reading voraciously. I was, read all the so-called classics, Tale of Two Cities, and the Dickens, and on and on, all of them, including the Hardy Boys, and then I even went on to Nancy Drew.
Wow.
I just read everything. And so I guess that I ended up being the last of a dying breed. I consider myself a generalist. Okay, I know generally about a lot of things, but I don't claim to be a huge expert on anything. But as a journalist, I did have the freedom and the opportunity to go and talk to the experts on no matter what it was. And so, yes, I tend to look at the big picture, and I tend to connect the dots. And unfortunately, today we live in very specialized societies. We've got medical people, they know medical stuff. We've got bankers, they know banking. We got lawyers, and they know the law. But all too often, they don't really know much of anything else.
Sure.
And so I guess, sometimes I refer to myself as the redneck philosopher. Is that I'm just an old Texas newspaper man, but I'm not stupid. I was very well educated, and I'm very well read. Sure. And I connect the dots, and I try to tell people, hey, look, this seems to be the big picture, I
think it's a pertinent point, though, Jim, is that, I think people in specific doctrines are handicapped in a way that they're so blindsided. I nearly went down that route. I was an engineer, and I got into some physics and science, and I almost did a PhD in medical physics. And you know what, Jim? I didn't want it. I was like, I don't want to be too specialized. I liked freelancing as an engineer, and I liked freelancing, the change of role all the time.
You like the latitude of knowing about a lot of things.
Yeah.
I'll give you a specific example, and this almost touches on your engineering background. About 20 years ago, as a reporter, I was interviewing an energy expert. And at the time, I'd gotten really fired up on solar energy, so I said, what about solar energy? And he said, that sounds really good. He said, but that's 20 years in the future. Okay, well, wait a minute. Here we are, 20 years in the future. Have we got solar energy? Not really. Okay.
Wow.
And so then he goes on to say, because he had been carefully trained as an electrical engineer, he says, look, you realize it would take solar panels covering the entire state of Arizona to provide enough energy to power just the city of Los Angeles. And I went, oh, wow, yeah, I guess that's true. I can see the problem, you know. Well, I went on, and then the more I thought about it, the more I realized where the flaw in his thinking was, because he could only think in terms of what he'd been taught, which was central generation. You got to centrally generate all this electricity and then pipe it to Los Angeles. I'm going, wait a minute, what if everybody in Los Angeles put solar panels on their roof? You know, then they could power the whole city, solar with no pollution and, you know, cheap energy. And then I realized, yeah, but if they did that, the power companies have not figured out how to make a cloud hang over your house if you don't pay your electric bill.
For sure.
Okay? So it was simply a matter of training and being pushed into certain thought patterns. In this case, it was you have to generate electricity centrally. Well, no, you don't. We could all be doing it.
Ironically, Jim, that's kind of why I'm here today. It's kind of why I've gone down this path of alternative history. I love the history of engineering and the history of science, and you know, our origins are extremely wacky. I mean, you know, we'll get into Sumerian stuff. We'll get into, we're going to talk today, should I say, with the listeners, our occulted history on UFOs. I mean, I'm always into alternative research. My father taught me that. He's a hypnotist and a healer, but he's also an engineer. A very unusual background, but I always simultaneously had two lines of thought. I had the academic, mainstream view that I was like, always educated myself, and then I always had this anomalies and mysteries in the background. I was always appealed to me. However,
me too. Same deal.
Yeah.
Here's the difference. Years ago, when I'm working as a newspaper reporter, if I'm sitting at a desk with another reporter and somebody runs in and says, hey, a UFO landed in the park across the street, the other reporter and the guy runs off, and the other reporter would say, boy, that guy was nuts, and go back to what he was doing. Me, I'd at least get up and go look out the window.
At least go and have a look. Well, ironically, it was renewable energies, Jim. Now, you'll appreciate this. Because I was working in energy, it was renewable energies I was attracted to. And I was a young pup. Wanted to do something good. I was a do-gooder, whatever you want to call it. I was working on wind farms, and that was the engineering I worked in heavy industrial, water treatment, stuff like that. And I got attracted to solar and wind. And then it was the BBC rolling out all these programs about renewable energies, trying to incite the public into this, you know, same philosophy that, do good, start reduce, reuse, recycle, and get everybody psyched up to this renewable energies and, heating your homes and insulation. And then what did they do? They put out this carbon tax and they started taxing the people on it. And and at that point, Jim, I got it. I went, you know what? This is all a fallacy. This whole constructed, social, prison that we're in. It's like, it's vicious, and this is what we're doing. We're giving all these false hopes. And I guess you appreciate that, and I kind of woke up pretty much after that.
Right.
And
it's like the solar company that got millions of dollars in government funding from the Obama administration. It turns out that all that money just was frittered away, and it was because it was going to Obama's relatives.
For sure. I know.
And I'm not just on his case. It's as you say and as you point out, it's the whole setup.
It's the whole setup.
The whole game is rigged.
The whole game is rigged, exactly, Jim. Now, we're going to talk about two things today. We're going to talk about ancient aliens. We're going to talk about the global elite, and that's the subtitle of the book, Do the Global Elite Conceal Ancient Aliens? We've got two heavy-weighted subjects there, Jim. I mean, let's talk about maybe perhaps the aliens first, and then we'll talk about, is there an elitist? Personally, I'm with you. I'm fully convinced. Right. I mean, the more you look at the evidence, the more it's there.
Well, you've got two factors there. And first you have to establish, is there really such a thing as aliens?
Yep.
And then the second thing is there really such a thing as globalists who are trying to push us into a new world order? And the answer is yes and yes. Okay. Yeah. To begin with, are there aliens? Well, come on. All you have to do is study the literature. They say, and the skeptics would say, okay, well, show me one. Introduce me to one. Well, we can't do that because the government takes everything up. when I was teaching in the university course on UFOs, I did this thing. I would take a quarter and I would hand it around and pass it around to everybody in the class. And then I'd take it and I'd put it in my pocket. And then a little bit I'd say, okay, now, I would have somebody ask, what about that quarter? What was that about? And I'd say, what quarter? And they said, well, the quarter you put in your pocket. And I said, no, I didn't put a quarter in my pocket. And I continued to deny it. And then I'd explain to them, look, how can you prove that I had that quarter? I said, you can't unless you pick me up and turn me upside down and empty my pockets. And I said, we cannot empty the pockets of the federal government. Mm-hmm. So there you go.
Sure.
And so, but when you look at the sum total of the evidence, historical, artifacts, anomalies, and even you look at all the evidence all around our solar system, and you find pyramids on Mars, you find pyramids on the moon, mm-hmm. You find pyramids all over the earth, in Asia, in Europe, in Egypt, of course, South America, Central America. And so it's obvious that there was something going on in our distant past that we've not been told the straight of.
The Sumerian account, I think, is one of the richest sources. Why, Jim, are archaeologists still grappling with this?
Well, because it shakes up established theories. For example, a few years ago, I visited in Egypt, and I went and saw for myself the extreme water erosion all around the Sphinx and also at mm-hmm. the Great Pyramid.
Sure.
Well, geologists will tell you this means that those structures sat out under heavy rain for a good long period of time. And yet they will also tell you that there has not been heavy rain on the Giza Plateau for more than 10,000 years. So what does that mean? That means the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid were there more than 10,000 years ago, which means they could not have been built by the Egyptians, who only go back about 5,000 years. Okay, but the Egyptologists who have built their whole careers on writing books and doing studies and holding meetings about Nefertiti and the Pharaoh and the, dragging rocks through the desert to build the pyramid, it throws their entire, work experience into a cocked hat, so they fight it. They go, no, and so there's technical arguments over dating and over this, that, and the other thing, because it would shake up the paradigm that they have created around us as to the formation of the Sphinx and pyramid.
It's almost, sometimes I think it's like an insanity that you couldn't reason with these people, or then I sometimes think that they're so blind. I'm looking for reasons, and it's like they're just so indoctrinated. It's the only word I can use, because it's like they are being so indoctrinated they just can't see the wood for the trees. And I'm trying to be kind to people. There are.
Well, science is a living, breathing thing. It continues to change. For example, when I was in school, grade school, we were taught that the moon was a dead world. No water, no air, no atmosphere, no nothing, okay? And now, it's more and more is constantly coming out showing that there is a magnetic field on the moon, that there is a slight atmosphere, that, they had waves of water detected crossing the face of the moon. It's just almost everything we were told turns out not to be true. And yet, science, you have to understand, is kind of, is the same as a religion. The scientists believe in it, and they believe what other scientists say,
sure.
And they build up their whole little paradigm, and then they're opposed to anyone who would question it.
Mm. I can forgive the archaeologists, because when they look at the Sumerian accounts and they interpret it as mythology, I think anything they don't understand they can call mythology.
Exactly, and that's where it all came from. In fact, it's interesting you say that, James, because what I've found is that there is very little argument over the translation of those ancient Sumerian tablets. They translate correctly. The difference is in the interpretation, because when they were first discovered and were beginning to be translated back in the mid 1800s, science and most people, did not believe that man could fly. They didn't believe in heavier than air flight. They didn't know about atoms. They didn't know about genes. They didn't know about gene splicing or gene manipulation. And so when they would read about these Anunnaki, it translates those who came from the heavens to the earth, and that they could fly around, and that they could take a primitive life form and by genetic manipulation improve the breed. You know, they said, well, it's impossible, so this is just their mythology. In fact, you can read a fairly accurate account of the history of mankind in the Encyclopedia Britannica, but it's not under history and it's not under science. It's under Sumerian mythology.
Sure.
So you're absolutely right. They didn't know about any of this, so they simply assumed that they were talking about their gods. And yet, if you go back and read the tablets, they very rarely say anything about gods. They just said the Anunnaki. They came here and they did this, and they went there and they did that. You know, they were simply reporting on what they knew to be true.
I mean, if let's say they did make it up, it would be the wildest science fiction story ever. I mean,
no, they need to get a job in Hollywood. But you know, there's an example too. Recently went to see that movie Interstellar, and it's about travel to another galaxy, you know, but one of the main thoughts of the whole thing is that it just takes years and years. It takes you 25 years to go somewhere, or 100 years. And that's been an argument they've used quite successfully by saying, well, there's no aliens coming here because from the nearest star, you know, it would take them 100 years to get here, you know. And the thing is, again, we're back to mindset. If all you can think of is terms of space travel through ramjets, you know, big rockets like we've been shooting off, then yes, that's a legitimate argument. But if you study physics and study the possibility of wormholes and the possibility of using energy manipulation to create an Einstein-Rosen bridge and fold space, then you might be able to go from point A to point B in a matter of minutes, okay? So, again, it's just whatever you're conditioned to think of.
Yeah. You know, that's a good point, Jimmy. Like, if you could take away this cultural prejudice that I don't want to pick on archaeology. I mean, there's a multitude of disciplines, but if you could take,
it's not just the archaeologists.
It's not just the archaeology, but if you could take away that cultural, 20th century cultural prejudice, you know, that has been instilled. In other words, we are the pinnacle and nothing is technologically advanced before us. And
that's right. And when they find something that doesn't fit into that paradigm, then it becomes an anomaly. And they will discuss occasionally anomalies, which I love because that's just a scientific term for WTF, right? Yeah. What's that? I don't know. Well, we're calling an anomaly.
Put it on the shelf. We'll deal with it later.
That's right. That's right. We'll put it in the basement and let's don't talk about it.
But the Sumerian stuff makes so much more sense if you bring in the alien question, and you know, and it's a scientific thing to do, Jim. I don't get the problem, people. You know, I don't
either. You're right. Like, you're absolutely right.
Why not ask the question?
The scientific thing is to question everything.
Everything.
You know, and then study it, and then see if you can replicate it, duplicate it. If you can, then it becomes scientific fact. Another example is that you know, the Sumerian tablets talk about how that a moon, a planetoid, came into the solar system and clipped the planet Mars. And or actually it was a huge planet called Tiamat.
Yeah.
And that half the planet was scattered into pieces but remained in its original orbit. Well, that's the asteroid belt. And the other half leaped over past Mars and coalesced into the Earth. And it was called the passing of the waters because Tiamat had been a watery planet. And you know, so that sounds really far out, but it does explain everything. It explains the asteroid belt. It explains why there's so much water on the Earth. It explains why they're continually finding meteorites and materials that apparently came from Mars on the Earth. It also explains why Mars was devastated because part of its atmosphere in this cataclysmic event was ripped away, and all life, what life there was on Mars, had to go underground. And I was just reading the other day, they've now found, the basic building blocks of life under the Martian surface. So as more and more scientific information becomes available, all it does is more and more support the Sumerian account.
For sure. Jim, in your book, Our Occulted History Due to Global Elite Control, you talk about strange moons. I wasn't, a lovely thing that you brought forward to me, I wasn't aware of us before, was Iapetus. Iapetus is, I wasn't aware of Iapetus. How bizarre. It looks like a Death Star, Jim, this thing.
That's right. It does. And what's even wilder is that it's got like a mountain ridge that goes right around its equator, all the way around this little moon, okay? And for all the world, what it reminds me of is the story of King Kong with Kong Island, where they built a big wall from one side of the island to the other to keep King Kong out, And I don't think there's a giant ape ripped there or anything, but I think this is a very strange moon, and like you said, hardly anybody knows anything about it.
Yeah, and then you've got Phobos on Mars. That it looks like it's emitting gas, but if it was doing so, it would have evaporated by now. Or is it emitting something? Was it a spaceship? Is it leaking something, materials? And then you've got the moon that rings like a bell. Are these things parked in our atmospheres,
That's true. That is probably one of the biggest mysteries we've got. Reportedly, we've been to the moon 6 times, and yet we still don't know much of anything about the moon. And for example, even the most basic thing about how it got there. When I was in school, we were taught that it broke away from the Earth, and there was some kind of cataclysmic event, and it tore away from the Earth and left a big hole on the Earth, which now filled with water, which we now know is the Pacific Ocean. And that's where the moon came from. But once we got there, they said the composition of moon rocks is nowhere near the composition of Earth rocks, so it didn't come from the Earth. It came from somewhere else. Okay, well, this picture, here's the Earth hanging in space. Here comes the moon traveling along. And by the way, one side of the moon is heavier and denser than the other side of the moon and filled with rocks that even predate the Earth. And so, I've got this picture of the moon sailing through space, and it's like bugs on the windshield. The side that's moving, the front side that's moving, is getting splattered with debris out in the universe as it moves along. But anyway, as it approaches the Earth, it goes past the Earth and it gets caught in the Earth's gravitational field. Then it's pulled back. Okay, so it goes back past the Earth again, and it's grabbed by the gravitational field, comes back, and this happens over, millions of years, and eventually it would go into orbit around the Earth, which sounds good, except if that was the case, you would think that the moon would be in a kind of a wobbly, elliptical orbit, wobbling around the Earth, and instead it's in a near perfect circular orbit, going right around the equator of the Earth, and stationary, with one side always facing the Earth, and at just the proper distance from the Earth, so that when the moon comes in and eclipses the sun, it perfectly covers the corona of the sun. Now that kind of precision is you just don't find in natural objects. And as Isaac Asimov, the great scientist, said, the moon shouldn't be where it is. But it is, okay? And the only logical explanation is that some intelligence parked it there in just a certain position. But then this shows where we are in our scientific thinking.
And that's the thing.
We know it's been there all this time. And we know that we didn't park it there. But we also know there's no such thing as aliens. So it's an anomaly, and we just won't talk about it.
Yeah, and everything that you just described there, Jim, as well, apparently all that you just mentioned, and that the fact that the moon is so big in relative size to the Earth, it's incredibly rare in moon satellites on Earth, and like a moon-Earth system. It's incredibly rare. We don't know another example of such a big moon being so close to a planet. We don't know. It's always
and in the type of orbit that it's in,
and the type of orbit that it's in. Yeah,
as you would expect.
Yeah. fascinating. The more I've looked into this moon thing, and I like that. I like there's so much numbers, and then when you look at it and you look at the evidence, there's evidence there, physical, tangible evidence. And I still say to people, there's your proof. It rings like a bell as well. I mean, they're dropping probes into this thing, and it's vibrating like it's been hitting steel or something, and a hollow on the inside.
Yeah, NASA, when one of the moon landers crashed back onto the surface of the moon, they said the moon rang like a bell for hours. Indicating that it might be hollow. Here's an interesting story, though. I had occasion to meet and interview Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon.
Oh, really?
And I asked him, I said, what do you think about the idea that the moon's hollow? Well, he immediately started kind of laughing and going, no, the moon's not hollow. But then he continued and he said, of course, we do believe that there might be giant caverns within the moon. Well, here's this famous astronaut. I don't want to get in his face, but I'm thinking giant caverns inside the moon and the hollow moon. What's the difference?
What is the difference? Exactly. Wow. Bizarre.
And then, so, we've got all of this information, and you mentioned the Aurora spaceship crash. This took place in 1897, 6 years before the Wright brothers flew. There was nothing man-made in the air. Yet something landed in Aurora, Texas, and they said the newspaper accounts at that time was in several newspapers, including the Dallas Morning News, which is still in publication. And they said the pilot was badly disfigured in the crash, but enough was recovered to show he was not an inhabitant of this world. Well, there you go, okay? So, to me, that's a smoking gun of the UFO issue. So I think we can see that, are there aliens? Yes, there are. And of course, then that leads us to the second question is, well, are there people who are trying to control the world? And for that, I would simply point you to a 2011 study by the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Mm-hmm. And they made a study of 43,000 multinational corporations, and they found that they essentially were all controlled by about 1,300 companies with interlocking ownership, and that these 1,300 companies were in turn controlled by about 20 banks. So, that means the people who own and control these 20 banks, and you're probably only talking about a few hundred people, they basically control the economy of this planet. So, I don't think you need any more evidence to show that, yes, there is a very wealthy elite that own the banking systems that control this world. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, there is an elite. There are these, what they style themselves as globalists, because they deal on a global basis. They deal with the economy not only of the United States, but of Europe and of Asia. And, that's extreme concentration of wealth and power.
We're talking the global elite concealing a lot of things, Jim. And I find this is one question I find difficult to answer. And it's difficult because I have to tell people so much background, or then I have to give them so much motive that I've lost them. I've lost them before I can answer the question. And this is that, why would anybody try to suppress our history? And I'm talking about Bones and the Smithsonian Institute, for a good example, giants, or people would think that this would be, front page news if we found some giants and found a new race of people. And there has been new races of man. There was the dwarf that was found in Indonesia, the little hobbit creature, and the Nosifo, and but that's the bit that's the stuff that gets out. And that's not the stuff that's the stuff that just managed to escape the grid, as far as I'm concerned.
That's true. And back to your question, but why would they want to suppress the truthful history of the human race and of the planet? And my answer would be because, let me put it this way. If you were Charlton Heston and you're marooned on the planet of the apes, okay, you cannot physically control 6 billion apes, okay? So, and yet you don't want to be just another ape. You came from somewhere else, and you know that you have a superiority of knowledge and technology over the apes, but you can't control them physically. So you have to keep them stupid, ignorant, and fighting each other all the time so that you can maintain control.
It's a divide and conquer.
That's what's happening here.
It's okay.
They keep us in the dark. They don't want us to know because they have these little stories that we've all been sold. gradual evolution, caveman to hunter-gatherers to farmers to cities and then city-states and then nations. And, and our history is just one slow evolutionary climb, from the primordial ooze to modern man, who is the apex of intelligence on this world. And yet, that's not right. All you have to do, by the way, if you want to prove to yourself that there has been extraterrestrial intervention in this planet, is simply go back and study history, in detail. And instead of this slow evolutionary climb that we are taught in school, what you're going to find is that there's been spurts. Civilizations come and go, technologies come and go, and you go all the way back and you find the ancient Chinese are talking about the dragons that'll fly through the air and spout fire, and that the Egyptians had the flying boats, and the Ezekiel in the Bible saw the fiery wheel that landed and picked him up and took him places, and you've got the flying shields of the Romans, that were seen, all the way up into the Middle Ages, and now you've got all the UFOs and the crop circles and the, animal mutilations, that are still unexplained. And whoa, wait a minute. The historical record plainly shows that there's something other than us going on.
Oh, for sure, for sure. One thing I find absolutely fascinating, Jim, is Nephilim, giants, Rephaim, these strange skulls that are found. I point to these things to people. If you want a biological answer, there's stuff there in the record. If you want a UFO or a architectural, there's stuff in the Sumerian record. There's contextual evidence.
It's all there, but you have to look for it, because you cannot turn on your TV or just turn on your radio and get a good picture of all this, because there is such tight control over the information that we're allowed to see.
In a way, I think they've been very successful, Jim, the global elite, in doing this up to a certain point. I think the internet is being so damaging to them. That's been a revolution. I think we're still right in the middle of that, and so we don't have a clear picture of it. But at some point in the future, they're going to look back and they're going to realize the internet is what has awakened the collective mind of mankind. Because today, despite the best evidence of governments and institutions, even a grade school kid can get on a computer and have the whole combined knowledge of mankind at his fingertips. I was watching a documentary recently, Jim, and I just couldn't believe it. It was coming out of the guy's mouth, but he was refusing. There was these newspaper articles, and you'll appreciate this. I'm sure you're aware of them all. A lot of newspaper articles from the turn of the century reporting giant finds. And the guy was saying, look, sent to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian demanded that these be sent. They sent the box. They went to the Smithsonian, never seen again. And the guy said, he was a biologist. He says, well, I don't care what it says there. Okay. And there's photographs of people standing beside these, by the way. And he says, I don't care what it says, because if these bodies existed, well, then they would be in the museum. And I would know about it. And I just laughed.
That shows I'm sure this guy is an educated, thoughtful person. He's locked into, to his conditioning and what he's been told. Here's what a lot of people don't understand about the Smithsonian. Most people agree that the Smithsonian Institution is probably one of the world's foremost scientific, organizations, which is, from that point true. But what they don't realize is that it was founded by an Englishman. Wow. Back in the 1800s, and before the turn of the 20th century, it was turned over to the federal government of the United States. So the Smithsonian is nothing more than a branch of the U.S. government. Now, would the government hide stuff from us and lie to us? Only continually. Okay? Mm-hmm. So when you say the Smithsonian has locked away various objects and various artifacts, yes, of course they would. Yeah. They can, and they have, and they will.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people think that the government is their friend for some reason. I don't think anybody's my friend. I'll build up a friendship, okay, with anybody or an organization. Yeah. I'll build the friendship. Don't tell me who my friend is, Don't.
Exactly. I mean, what's the old joke about, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. Yeah, right. I guess I
Jim,
think it's
is
Ronald Reagan who said, the biggest problem we have is government.
Jim, is it true there's a fly ban? There's a ban on flying into the Grand Canyon because of these Egyptian caves.
Yes, and also a ban on certain areas in the north part of the Grand Canyon. They say, well, there's caves there and they might be dangerous and you can't go there. And there's actually they try to prevent even hitchhikers, but hikers from going in there. And it's interesting you mentioned that because, of course, what you're referring to are the newspaper articles from back in about, seems like about 1909, and where they talked about finding these Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon. And they said they gave quite a detailed description.
Very detailed.
Of the whole thing. I'm looking at the Phoenix Gazette of 1909, and it talks about these tunnels they found, copper instruments, war weapons, hieroglyphics, and then of course it was all turned over to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian today says, no, we never got anything like that. It's not there. And yet, if you go to the north side of the Grand Canyon, you're going to find these places, these rock formations and these areas that have names like the Tower of Set, the Tower of Ra, Horn's Temple, Osiris Temple, Isis Temple. Wait a minute. Why are all these Egyptian names up there if there was nothing to the story about finding Egyptian artifacts?
Wow.
So, yeah, there's just a lot of question about what's going on. And frankly, unfortunately, the track record of truthfulness on the part of the U.S. government, I mean, think about light at the end of the tunnel in Vietnam prior to the Tet Offensive. Think about I am not a crook just before he gets indicted for being a crook. Think about weapons of mass destruction. Will they lie to us? Yes, continually.
If any way of getting to those caverns another way, like is there? I presume there's a river at the basin of the Grand Canyon. Is there any way up from the bottom?
Yes, I think so. In fact, that's one thing that kind of got me on this trail was some years ago I met a young fellow who was an avid hiker, and he said that he had gone on foot into the northern areas there of the Grand Canyon, and that he had actually found concrete platforms that he suspected were probably used for footing for derricks and pulleys and stuff to excavate these caves and excavate these Egyptian artifacts that they found.
Really?
And, I can't think of any other reason why you'd have concrete platforms in this wild area of the Grand Canyon. And again, to the fact that there are certain areas in that same vicinity which are now off limits. They try to say, no, you can't go there. So, yeah, this goes on all the time.
Yeah, a lot of people report strange military craft, either black helicopters and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we all know about the underground bases and black helicopters, and it's not just in the United States. You've got Pine Gap in Australia. You've got the island of Diego Garcia. You've got all these places around the world that are U.S. bases that are just highly secretive and essentially, unapproachable. You're just inaccessible. You can't get to them.
Jim, I think the main thing that kickstarted a lot of this off for you will be research into JFK. Tell me about that little area of your life. I think, I still think, personally, I'm an Irishman, by the way, Jim. I'm living in Ireland still today. I go between the UK and Ireland. JFK don't matter too much to me, but I think it matters to the world that they know the truth. And I think it's still pertinent, Jim, that we know the truth about JFK. It's as pertinent today as it was when it happened, because if they lied about that, I think it set the president, not president as in PRES, they set the president for something else to happen, another event. If they pulled the wool over somebody's eyes, then they did it again. And I think that's what led to 9/11. I think all roads head to another conspiracy if you get away with it the first time.
That's exactly right. And you put your finger on the crux of the situation. If you want to decide for yourself whether or not there's conspiracies, then I would say start with the JFK assassination, because it's recent enough that you can pick it apart and you can find all sorts of good information, and yet it's distant enough to where hopefully the investigator is not going to be so emotionally involved in it that he loses sight of objectivity. But Kennedy assassination is a great starting point for determining not only the proof of conspiracy, but how conspiracies work, because here's how it boils down. Either Kennedy was killed as a result of one lone individual who just got off some lucky shots, and therefore it was just kind of an act of God, just a single strange occurrence, or there was somebody else involved and there was a conspiracy. Well, all you have to do is study the literature, and it's obvious that Oswald did not act alone if he acted at all. Mm-hmm. But keep in mind, when the police asked him, where were you at the time of the shooting? He said he was in the Texas School Book Depository's downstairs lunchroom eating his lunch. And they said, well, was there anybody there with you? And he correctly described these two guys that worked at the book depository. And I would ask, how could he have mentioned and described these guys accurately if he hadn't been there to see them? And so there's even a question of whether he did anything. But if he did participate in the shooting, he certainly did not act alone, because acoustical evidence, photographic evidence, ear witness testimony all place shots coming from places other than the depository. So therefore, there was a conspiracy. Okay? Well, if there was a conspiracy, here we are 50 years on, how come we don't know about it? And that's because it's been covered up at the level of the federal government in the United States. And now all of a sudden, well, now who would have been in charge of that at that time? And well, it would have been his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, who became president on Kennedy's death, and his old buddy and next door neighbor, J. Edgar Hoover, who was head of the FBI and totally controlled the investigation into the assassination. And both of those men were about to lose their jobs. The Kennedys had let it be known that they were not going to accept Johnson on the Democratic ticket in 1964 election. And they'd also let it be known that they were going to force Hoover to retire under the federal age requirements for retirement. And so, but then Kennedy's killed, Johnson becomes president, all of his troubles go away, and less than a month after the assassination, he holds a press conference, praises J. Edgar Hoover, and exempts him from the federal mandatory retirement age, and thus installing him as FBI director for life. And it was those two men who also can be demonstrated and proven to have participated in criminal acts such as destruction of evidence, suppression of evidence, alteration of evidence, and fabrication of evidence, and intimidation of witnesses. Now, in any other case, those would be considered crimes, and that would make Johnson and Hoover accessories after the fact. And under our legal system, that makes them as guilty as the person that pulled the trigger. So in the case of the Kennedy assassination, there's your two men who are guilty. Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, and yet, oh, well, we don't want to talk about that. So that's just, they just keep it all muddled and confused, and, I guess we'll never know.
Yeah. The more I think about it now, and I've had a few people talk about JFK, Jim. I know you've done a lot of research, you've pioneered a lot of research in that, and, I think, like, to go back to the point is, I think because they were so successful in covering it up, I don't like the word conspiracy theorist, by the way. I think conspiracy theorist is a derogatory term for a critical thinker or a pioneering thinker.
That's right. That's exactly right.
But they label this thing as a conspiracy. Anybody who looks into it is a conspiracy theorist. And it's like the conspiracy theory formula to debunk is like, just since the JFK era, anybody that researches anything with an open mind is like a conspiracy theorist. And, the success of
are you familiar that there was a document sent around in the late 60s by the CIA to its assets, and that clearly states, here's how you rebut the questions about the Warren Commission, their conclusion. You say that they're just conspiracy theorists and that they're just trying to sell a book. and that they don't have all the facts. All of the arguments that you've probably heard through your life was all, put down on paper by the CIA and sent to their people on how to refute people who wanted to question the Warren Commission. Isn't that something?
And that's despicable in itself. That's despicable in itself, Jim. But, I think because they got away with it to a certain degree, I don't think they got away with it to everybody on the planet. I mean, to the bulk of the public they did, but because they were so successful, I think they got cocky. I think the global elite got cocky. Of course,
that's right. And then they pull off something like 9/11, which is so obvious, and the facts are so contrary to what the official story is, that 9/11 makes the Kennedy assassination look like truly a deep, dark mystery.
Yeah, and in a way, I think that's why 9/11's got so many blunders in it. It's like they don't need to be so particular about every little detail, because they only need to fool a small percentage of the public, because that percentage will then convince the bulk of the public. There's always going to be somebody that is intelligent and go, I don't believe that,
That's right. That's right. And now you put your finger on the fact of the conspiracy cover-up. There's never been a cover-up in 9/11, Kennedy assassination, any of these things. There's never been a true cover-up in the sense that there's a lack of truthful information. It's quite the opposite. It's in all of these, what we see is obfuscation. Okay, they confuse the issue just enough to where the bulk of the public is confused and goes, well, I don't know, and they fall back on their belief system, which has been carefully collated into the public, which is the government's good, it's fair, it's just, it's there for your benefit, and as a result, nothing gets done.
Yeah.
I think everybody in the whole world would agree, regardless of their stance on the Kennedy assassination, that assassination is controversial. That there's a controversy there. I think everybody would agree to that. Well, when there's controversy, then there's no resolution. And as a result, it's just everybody muddles along and goes, well, I don't think what we're told is the truth, but I'm not sure what the truth is, and so nothing happens. Nobody gets prosecuted. Nothing is resolved.
Yeah. I think one of the important things to note about 9/11 is the media's involvement, because when you see Building 7 being reported as falling, and it's still in the background being upright.
I know.
That's very key, because that shows
the Solomon Brothers building has collapsed, and yet behind her it's still standing. So somebody had advance word that building was coming down, and it was never hit by any airplane.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the key thing. This is the media's involvement in it. It's like they're reading the hymn sheets, Jim. It just shows you the level of how deep this thing goes.
Well, that's in the UK they over here we call them news anchors or newsmen.
Yeah. And
in the UK, more correctly, they call them presenters. And that's a much more accurate description, because they don't know anything. They're not there at the scene. They're not lots of times, they're not even trained journalists. They are presenters. They read the script. Yeah. And so the question is, who's writing the script and for what purposes?
Yeah. I never even thought about it like that, Jim. You're so right. That's hilarious when you think about it.
Right.
Hey, Jim, let me throw a curveball at you. This one I've heard, and I've looked into it. Apparently they say, there's certain people have said that they went into Iraq, the second time to get the body of Gilgamesh, and they said that they could find Gilgamesh's body with this new technology. I mean, when you look, when I first heard this story, I wasn't so sure, but apparently there's a substance in the body. It's a ferrous substance. It's got iron in it, and they have a special thing like a resistivity meter or something like that, some very sophisticated thing. And they can do like an MRI scan on the ground, and they can tell if a body's been in the ground or not. Mm-hmm. And apparently this technology didn't exist, but when it came out, they brought it to Iraq, and they went to looking for the body of Gilgamesh. They brought a British archaeologist over, and after they had looked for the body of Gilgamesh and flown the guy in, they pulled out of Iraq 2 days later. I don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely something to all of that. For one thing, here's what I know for sure, is that prior to the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, there were stories in the Associated Press and around the world that French and German archaeology teams had been making amazing new discoveries in Iraq. And one of these discoveries, according to the Germans, was that they had located under the waters of the, I forget now, either the Tigris or the Euphrates, what they believed to be the burial site of King Gilgamesh, who up until that point was thought to be some kind of mythological king. But then now they've decided that he was a real person. And of course, if that's the case, then you have to go back and understand that according to the saga of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest complete story in the history of the world, he said that he was part human and part God. Okay? So he was a hybrid.
And a giant.
In other words. And we also know, and it was widely reported in the mass media, that Saddam Hussein believed himself the reincarnated Gilgamesh, and that he was trying to restore the glory of Babylon. Well, then that leads to the story in the Old Testament, in the book of Daniel, about King Nebuchadnezzar. Saddam Hussein believed himself the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. I misspoke. And so then you go study the story of King Nebuchadnezzar, and we find that he built a structure out of gold that has been translated as a fiery furnace, but obviously it was something other than that, because people would go in it and come out, although then they would get sick and die. So he then goes and gets the Hebrew priests, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, brings them to Babylon and says, okay, you have knowledge of the ancient technology. I want you to get in there and make this thing work properly. And they said, well, you're not our king. You don't believe in our God, so we're not going to work for you. And he said, well, then I'm going to put you in there, and you either make it work or you're going to die. So he had his minions put them in the structure, and then he says, are they in there? Because he didn't want to get anywhere close to it. And they said, yeah. He said, but wait, we put 3 people in there, and now there's 4 people in there. What? Wow. So what's going on here? Well, apparently they were able to create an energy field, which perhaps was teleportation or created a wormhole or some kind of phenomenon like that. And there was another person came through, and when he said, well, who's that 4th person? They said, well, it's the Son of God. Oops, the Son of God. But then that's the end of it. That's the last we hear of this story, except that King Nebuchadnezzar was so impressed with these Hebrew priests that he put them in charge of Babylon. So here we have all of this information that there was some kind of extraterrestrial, perhaps, technology being used in ancient Babylon, and that Saddam Hussein was trying to restore it or get his hands on it. And the next thing you know, we, the United States, invades Iraq, and instead of conquering one area after another, like standard military tactics, they just made a beeline for Baghdad. And what happened in Baghdad? The looting of the Iraqi National Museum. And according to Colonel Matthew Bagdanos, who investigated that for General Tommy Franks, he said the basement was an inside job. They knew what they were after. Sure. And they bypassed expensive fakes, and some guards were bribed and missing. They had keys to some of the locked vaults, and they took thousands of artifacts out of there.
Smash and grab.
So it seems like the invasion of Iraq was simply an attempt to go get this extraterrestrial technology.
Like a smash and grab, Jim.
Yes, exactly. And of course, in the process, then they hired a street mob to go run in and loot some of the upper stories so they could act as cover to say, well, it was just a mob of looters. And, of course, within weeks, they were able to recover the biggest bulk of the missing artifacts out of the museum because, the mob, the stuff they got, immediately they take it to the flea market and try to sell it. And of course, they recovered a whole lot, except for what was in the basement. And according to Bagdanos, they didn't get hardly anything. The stuff in the basement disappeared. And what would have been in the basement? The stuff they had just discovered. Sure. And before it had been cataloged and put on display.
You know, Jim, I've no problem accepting the global elite, the secrecy behind, goes on behind closed doors. I've no problem accepting the ancient technology. I've no problem accepting the ancient Sumerian record with a high technology or giants or suppression of giants in their bones. What I try to do is, Jim, from a kind of intellectual perspective, is fine-tune what the whole agenda is. And with the Gilgamesh body story, I somehow think that these guys were going in to get the bones to try and get some of the DNA material out of it to either back engineer or some sort of weird stuff going on. I mean, is there bloodlines going on, Jim? I mean...
Well, how about this? How about this for your consideration? And this is just a theory. What if way back there were these space travelers, these Anunnaki, and that there was a terrible cataclysm, either a natural disasters or perhaps even atomic warfare that just devastated whole sections of the planet, like the radiation that's been found in the Indus Valley, the radiation that's been found on the Sinai Peninsula. And most of them said, whoa, and they left, okay? But they left behind some of the revolutionaries, some of the troublemakers. And so now they're marooned on the planet Earth, and all they want to do is go home, but they didn't have the technology. They had the knowledge, but they didn't have the technology. It'd be like you and I, James, go in a time machine back, say, 150 years, okay? We would know what an automobile is. We would know how it works, but could we make an automobile? No, because we couldn't even, the infrastructure is not there to even make a spark plug. Okay, so they're stuck on the planet of the apes. So they've been trying to guide and shape and push along the knowledge of the apes to the point to where they can have space travel and time warp travel and wormhole travel, and so that they can go home.
What a fascinating insight, Jim. That's an awesome way to look at it, you know. It's mind-blowing, the whole thing. It's mind-blowing, it's mind-blowing not so much in what we're talking about, but in what the agenda and what the motives are. And that's what gets me more so than anything.
Well, their first motive is to stay in charge. They don't want to lose the power to control the path, the evolutionary path of mankind. And then the second one is to achieve their purposes. This even might get to such issues as chemtrailing and some of the weather modification that's going on, because I've had people within U.S. intelligence explain that what that is basically is terraforming. They are changing the environment of this planet to suit them.
Wow. Yeah, you know, I don't think they would. You know what I think? It's so. Forgive my negativity or cynicism, but it's like even some people start dying or developing diseases as a result. They'll make money from the pharmaceuticals to heal them, and if they don't heal, they die, and they'll make money on that as well. They make money on the whole thing as well.
It's a win-win situation. They cull the human population and make money in the process.
For sure. Wow. Jim, I just wanted to give out your website. We're at the top of the hour. I haven't got many more questions because I only promised you an hour today. I got to get you back on at some point in the near future, Jim. You're an awesome guest. You really are. Such a wealth of information. Please give us out your website there, Jim, and where we can get a copy of your latest book.
Okay. Well, my website, unsurprisingly, is jimmars.com. That's JIMMARRS, 2 R's in Mars. And you can order my books. You can order my DVDs. You can catch stories that I post from time to time that you probably will not find in the corporate mass media. And so, yes, I would encourage everybody to go take a look and keep an open mind and think positively, okay? Because here's the bottom line. There's more of us than there are of them, and we're getting smarter all the time. So if you'll open your heart, open your mind, learn the truth about things, and then act accordingly, we might just come out okay in the end.
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned that, Jim, to think positively. Oceans of love and positivity for everybody. I want to mention this because this was one of the questions, and it's, a lot of people concentrate on the negative aspect that we were a slave species to mine gold, and they go with Sitchin's route. Now, that's fine. I don't actually have a problem with that as a person, because if that is true, okay, well, I wouldn't have been created anyway, okay? So if I wasn't created, I wouldn't be here, okay? We're not there anymore, okay? We are evolving. We are in whatever place we are now, okay? Okay, right. So many people get so down about this, so aggressive, so angry that we may have been engineered, and that, you know.
Well, even if that's the case, okay, if you finally come to an understanding and acceptance that we're a slave race, Well, you've got half the battle won, because once you understand that you're a slave, then you start resisting.
Exactly, Jim.
Start a revolution. Say no. Just say no. I'm not going to do that. Hey, let's go have a war with Iran. No, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, acceptance and awareness, and, you know, even if that's true, like, I mean, I'm not so sure in some of the finer details. I mean, that's the joy for me. I'm trying to find out finer details.
Well, it's hard to resist being a slave if you don't know you're a slave.
Well, true. And that's where I think, even in a modern sense, Jim, a lot of what we're talking about, what the global elite do, they're using modern techniques to enslave us with the financial grid, with, you know,
well, the two main control mechanisms have been, first and foremost, religion. And then secondly, finances, money.
Even education.
And when you go far enough back, you find that they're intertwined.
Yeah.
For example, Jesus, you know, the Prince of Peace, when's the one time that he really got violent? Well, it was against the money changers. And where were they? In the bank? No, they were in the temple.
Sure.
Okay? So this combination of religion and finances have been the key control mechanisms over the human race since time immemorial.
I think my job today is just to educate people, Jim, and say, look, you know, ask the right questions, look at the evidence, you know, make your own mind up. You know, we are in a big brother state. You're not going to change it, but you can resist it. You can not comply, at least not comply.
Think for yourself.
Yeah. It's an important
And that means don't trust me, don't trust James. Just think for yourself. Study. I'm not asking for anybody's belief. Okay, I'm just saying, check it all out. Listen to what I'm saying to you, then go find out if that's true. If it's true, then you'll know for yourself, and it won't be a matter of who do you trust.
For sure. Jim, what's new for you today? Where are you at? Are you doing conferences? Are you taking a breather? Enjoying the holidays?
Well, I'm editing on a new book, which will be out sometime after the first of the year.
Oh, wow.
And it's going to be a doozy. It's all about how that they are putting us into a culture of death. You know, bad food, bad air, bad water, bad vaccines, you know, you name it. Anything they can do to keep us dumbed down, drugged out, sick. And so then in the process, I am going to be talking at a few conventions, the whole Conscious Life Expo in the first week in February, and then later on at the Contact in the Desert in California. Yeah, you know, even though it all may fall apart at any minute, at least I'm still operating on the expectation that we'll still be going along here in a few months.
Where do you get your energy from, Jim?
Good question. I think it's rapidly going. But I just have always had this insatiable thirst for truth, and so it keeps me motivated.
For sure. Jim, I really thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure having you. I got to talk to you when the new book's out. I really look forward to that. I wish you every success with it. You've provided a wealth of information for a lot of people out there, Jim, so take a pat on the back for that. And thank you for coming on for the holiday season. I really appreciate it, Jim.
That's quite all right. Thank you very much, James.
Take care, brother. Speak to you soon, brother.
Bye.
Bye now.